Hello, everybody, and welcome to Truth Be Told. Thank you very much for listening in. I'm continuing my series on age demographics in the church and trying to get a better understanding of how different people think across age groups, because I think this tends to be one of the biggest differences in the church in how people think, and differences can often lead to division. So, hoping to kind of head that off and just gain some understanding from the different age groups. And so, I've got a person from each age, representing kind of not only themselves but also their age group, and hopefully we get a good amount of answers that are reflective of how each group thinks, and that way when the other ages listen to them, we're just working on gaining understanding with each other and we minimize conflict that way. So in this episode, I've got my good friend Dallin, and he has graciously agreed to join us. I don't know how nervous he is. He seemed nervous over text, but now that he's here, he seems fine, which has actually been my experience with Dallin in the past. I've been his camp counselor a couple of times, and so we've got a little bit of a history, but I don't think we've ever just sat down and talked for an hour, so this is definitely different. But I really think that he's just a smart guy. He is going to represent his age group well. And Dallin, before you get started, I just want to say, um, I don't want you to feel any pressure that like all your answers have to be reflective of every answer that someone your age might give. Okay, you can't possibly do that. Answer to the best of your knowledge, how you think maybe your friends would respond, and hopefully you yourself are just like, representative of all of them. And so your thoughts and opinions are very valid in this as well. So no pressure on getting everybody's opinion accounted for. Just answer how you feel, and we'll be good to go.
Alrighty. Well, thanks for having me. This
Yeah,
is
no, this should be fun.
that should be
You ever
really
been on
fun.
a podcast before?
Nope. First time.
Okay, and then you'll have your own, you'll do so well, you'll have your own next week and then run me out of business, and I won't like that very much at all. All right, well, let's just jump right into the first question then. I'm asking the same questions across the board, to all the age demographics, and the answers so far have been pretty sweet, so I'm really excited to just see what you have to say. And the first question is, if you were to build your own church, how would you build it? How would you construct it? And I don't ask about like a building, obviously, like this isn't carpentry or architecture. Although, man, this guy's smart. He probably could do it if he needed to. But no, if you were to build your church, like what kind of environment would you want to construct that would be ideal for all kinds of people to come to?
I think my main priority would be unity, because unity between members of all age groups and just between like kind of everybody is the most important basis and grounding for kind of the rest of it. You need to be connected, right? Which I think could be done through activities outside the church, especially for the younger generations. They're still kind of developing and more reliant on that. And so, like, physical activities and Bible studies and stuff to get them warmed up to that. But also, I think service would be a really good priority as well. Like, I think giving them opportunities to serve and to feel wanted and like kind of help others and continue to build that whole sort of environment is the most important aspect. Obviously, grounding it in God and in faith and in hope and in for what the future beholds. But I think unity is definitely an important aspect to that.
Yeah, unity is, I mean, it's like so much of the book of Ephesians is all about unity. So we've got like a whole book that kind of centers around that topic. And I like that you talked about doing activities even outside of church, building that unity, because I think that as we get older, we stop realizing the importance of that. And you said, especially for younger people, that's important. But honestly, I've noticed even in my own congregation, like when I was a kid and we had a bunch of kids running around, like we're 9, 10 years old, our parents got together and did things to try and, bring us together and make us be friends and everything. Now that we're a little bit older, some of us, like young adults, still hang out, but a lot of the adults have kind of given that up as time goes on. And you notice just like not a separation or a disunity necessarily, but I really just think we forget that even adults need to like go get dinner together or go play a board game or something. Like that's important for us
Yeah.
too. So hopefully you don't feel like that's just for you guys, but
No.
like sometimes in the church we do make it like we're going to do this event so that the younger people can get together. It's like it should
Yeah.
be for us too.
It's yeah. Yeah. I think you you just need friends to rely on and like get away from the world and all your responsibilities for a while to just kind of have fun, know what it's like to be in the community, be loved, and
Like everyone needs to remind or be reminded of the fact that they're part of a community and that they're loved. And yeah, and service does go into that. I'm sure we'll get into service a lot as we keep talking because I think it's just a really important aspect of church life in general that if you don't have like I mean Jesus talks with his disciples about like I didn't come to be served but to serve and let the first among you be last and I mean he talks about this stuff a lot because I think that's what he wanted his church to have. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more, but those are really good um, like opening characteristics for building a church. And I think that I want to be clear too with people that are listening that we talked beforehand. I sent these questions out to whoever I'm interviewing, and I tell them like all of this is kind of aside from biblical truth. Obviously, biblical truth has to be like, if you have a church where you all get along really well, or you're unified in things that are like Satan worship or something, well, you're probably not going to have the greatest church. So that kind of goes without saying. And so when Dallin is talking about unity and service, this is kind of like on top of a church that's already, teaching the truth in a loving way. So just then, let's just move on to question number two because um, that's just kind of like a baseline question. I think that everybody kind of has this view of how they see church. They think like, okay, well, church is the place I go where this happens, or church is the place I go to feel this way. And I think we just kind of all assume that we're on the same page with that. But I just wanted each person's answer to make us all realize like it might not be the same for you. Like you said, for an adult, they might not think of extracurricular church activities as like a part of church necessarily. They're thinking more of like, well, we got to go there and put out snacks and lead songs, and that's all important. But it might take a younger person to remind them of the importance of that. So that's why I wanted to cover the first question. But the second question is more generational specific, which is how do you feel your generation is valued in the grand scheme of church life? Which I should mention, you are 15 years old right now. So you kind of hit this the last interview we did, the girl was 13 years old, and she's so in the younger teen age, and you're kind of right in the middle of that age. And the reason I'm doing so many teens is because you guys change so much. Like your answers are going to be drastically different from a 12, 13-year old, and a 19, 20-year old's answers are going to be very different from yours. So 15 years old, you're kind of right in that middle teen age. How do you feel your generation is valued in the grand scheme of church life, either undervalued or properly valued, and how so?
I'd say that my current demographic is pretty valued. Like, we're being shown the ropes right now. We don't quite know what we're doing. They're kind of guiding us along and kind of uh, instructing us, giving us a direction to head to, while also like just warming us up to kind of the life ahead, and also implementing us into the church kind of for the first time, right? When we're younger, we kind of go outside, play tag, that sort of stuff. But now that we're older, we're like being active, serving the community, talking with people. Talking to adults is scary, but they're actually pretty cool. So
I'm glad you said that.
you're pretty
Thank you for
cool.
that admission.
Yeah, you're pretty cool.
It's funny because I don't even think of myself. I mean, I know I'm an adult, but like I don't, of all the age groups I'm covering, I'm going up to like 85 or something, you know what I mean? So I'm thinking older people, and you're thinking, yeah, older people like you. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. It's fair though. It is fair. So you'd say you guys are pretty properly valued at the moment.
I think so, yeah. I think there could be a little bit more involvement with like, you know, service and like talking and forget the word for it, but like activities and stuff. I feel like there could be a little bit more of that we don't kind of do much in the moment. I think they're still trying to get us used to that, but I believe we could definitely be a benefit to the congregation currently.
Okay. And do you think that the reason there could be more of that is on your guys' end or more on the opportunities you're given? Like, do you feel kind of like you're slightly maybe pigeonholed into certain areas where maybe you'd like to go into other areas?
I think we are currently pigeonholed. I might be biased because I'm from a big congregation, and so
Yeah,
we've got a lot of people and a lot of roles, but more people than roles. So
yeah.
there's there's still not a lot of room for us, but they do they do go out of their way to make room and give us opportunities.
What do you see as the role of your generation? Like, what if you could define, you've already defined like your ideal church, how would you define your ideal role? Like, what kind of responsibilities would that include? Or, um, like, what level of trust do you feel like you guys have attained to?
We are part of the church, kind of like strengthening up the whole congregation, not just some footer that like they take care of and like, show them the ropes, but also like we help them back. Like if someone needs stuff done or, like groceries or mowing or stuff, we can do that. We're young, we're fit. Like we can do things that are uh that can be beneficial to a lot of people.
I often wonder, like, the things you mentioned were again extracurricular, like outside of services, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we've already covered that church goes way beyond just like the walls of a building. But do you think there's like a willingness or like a desire from your age group? Because I think the perception of like the older people is nobody wants to work anymore. No one wants to do the hard stuff, so we'll just get it done ourselves. So maybe they don't ask as often. But could it be the other way where you guys don't want to do that kind of stuff because it's not as fun?
I think I think it kind of goes both ways. I'm more of the perception that like I would definitely love to get stuff done and, do the hard things, but I there's probably people out there that are uh like don't want to do that. It's not quite their time yet. I'll do that when I'm older, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe like in a couple years or maybe now it would be good to like introduce us to the more crucial roles of the congregation and all the fundamentals of that. We can't quite give sermons yet. That's probably a bad idea, but we could definitely like help behind the backgrounds and run errands and that sort of thing.
Okay. So fundamentals of church, what do you see that as?
Um,
Because I think so many people have this idea that the fundamentals are like from the pulpit, it's speaking, it's song leading, which I'm not saying is wrong. Like to teach a person how to lead songs young means they'll be good at it by the time they are needed in that role later on, right? So I have no problem with
yeah.
that. But I'm just curious, like, if those aren't the things you mean that are fundamental, which I'm not saying they're not fundamental, but that if that's not what you're referring to, what kind of jobs do you mean?
I mean, like there's typing, there's audio, there's video, there's stuff like that, but also kind of like the background stuff, like including people, holding doors, like greeting people, talking to people, kind of making the Sabbath worth doing and not just what you sit in on because you're religious.
Yeah, I think there's this perception that I just watched this video the other day that I thought was pretty funny, where it was a parent filming their child, and it said, "You will learn greater heights of patience when you have a toddler that says, 'I can do it myself.'" And it's this little kid trying to buckle herself in for like 45 seconds and she can't do it. And you can imagine the parent being like, "Come on, like you gotta go, And I think there's this perception that maybe the younger people, like by some of the older generations, the younger people are like that, where it's like it's just easier if we just do it ourselves. You know what I mean? Like we don't really want to hand that stuff off to some of the younger people because they might not get it right. They might, need too much help. And I understand that sentiment because sometimes it is just easier to do things yourself. But if you don't pass that on, then you're not training people to do that stuff when you really need them to do it, which can be detrimental to the whole congregation, you know?
Yeah, there's going to be a period of time where there's the older person, and if they don't take someone under their wing, when they retire that job or hand it over to someone else, they're not going to have the experience or like uh, the training that they had, and so there's going to be this huge dip of like uh, kind of cluelessness. And
Hmm.
so I think if you kind of show people the ropes along the way, you'll have backups and backups so that people
Yeah.
can just get the job done and do it effectively. Maybe not for the first couple times, but after a while, there'll be a time where it'll come into play.
Yeah, that was such a wise statement actually. There's going to be dips in the effectiveness or the ability to have something be done because you've waited for so long to train somebody that now you have to do it when you're not really equipped to train and they're not really equipped to learn. And yeah, that I think I see that happening all the time. And I think that maybe some of that comes from people being a little bit afraid um, of it's like almost like a parent and a child, which maybe we don't see it as that very often, but a parent sometimes, for better or worse, wants to hold on to certain things. Like, I don't want you to take your training wheels off just yet. I don't want you to drive just yet. You know what I mean? I can imagine your parents being like, well, they might want to kick you out of the house. I don't actually know. They might be really ready for you to start driving so you can get out of there. But some parents are just like, my little kid is growing up. I don't want to give this stuff to them yet to do. And we have this idea that to train a person means to hand over the reins to them. And it really doesn't. You can train somebody for a long time before you actually hand it to them. But if we make the mistake of feeling like, oh, we can't give them any responsibility until they're fully ready, they're never going to be fully ready.
There's not going to be any development made. Yeah.
Yeah.
I promise any of the older folk that we're not that scary. We don't bite normally, unless provoked. So
Yeah. And I think you guys aren't. Sometimes I think there's this mentality of like, oh, they're trying to take over. They're trying to do it their own way. Look at them grabbing for my responsibilities. And I'm like, I really just don't see that. I mean, at least at camp, like I'm looking at a dorm at camp, which is kind of like some of my main interactions with you. I'm like, man, these guys they're ready to just like run and use their energy and use their youth to do the things you ask them to do. But if they're never asked, then that might be a problem. You had some really wise stuff in there. That
thank
was
you.
very solid.
I'm a very
Um,
wise and humble person. So
that's what I'm putting right at the introduction. I'm just going to do a reel that's just you saying that. Interview with Dallin Delamater. I'm a very wise and humble person. That'd be good.
the most
All right.
humble.
Well, yeah, the most humble person. Yeah. Just like Moses. All right. Well, I'm glad that you feel your demographic is properly valued, even though, as we discussed, there's some work that could be done in that area. I really like your balance. You're kind of the exact person I've been looking for these interviews because even if you were a little bit hesitant to do it at first, the people that are like, oh, I want to talk, get me on that podcast. I got something to say. They're the ones that are a little bit less balanced. They're either going to rage against people that aren't in their age group or they're going to tear their own demographic down and be like, we're the worst. I hate all my peers and we're just so bad. I think you're being very balanced where you're just like, yeah, I think we're doing well. We could do better. And that's perfect. So we might have actually gotten into question three just a little bit, but I'll ask it anyways because I know you have just copious notes written down there. But what is one thing that you wish other generational demographics would understand about yours? So this could be younger people looking up to you, or it could be older people kind of looking not down on you, but down at you. And you can feel free to list a few if you'd like.
So I think for the older generations, I think the main thing to note is that we aren't actually rebellious. I know there's this stereotype around teenagers because maybe like, boomers and millennials, like they not to throw any like slang terms out there, but like they kind of grew up in a society where they're like kind of turned and rebelled kind of any chance they got. I have parents who grew up in that generation. We're really not like that. We don't want to turn against authority and slam them for everything that they've ever believed in. We just kind of like we follow authority, and when we see fit, we challenge it. We don't often see fit because we're a very like moldable generation, I think. We just don't really have the tendency to go out of our way to like challenge things or like do things wrong intentionally just to spite. Like we're quite a bit more like kind than that. I It's not the right word, but we're we're very kind of chill and lax, and if you get to know us, we're actually pretty cool.
Why do you think that is?
I think that like we just have a different basis. Have you ever heard the expression uh hard times make strong men make weak times, and weak times make weak men?
Hmm.
I think that's kind of where we're at. It's got its ups and downs. We're not quite weak, but we're also not like take charge, do it ourselves. Like we're not we're not really power hungry. And
Interesting.
like I think it might have to do something with the introduction of social media. We're a lot more connected, and so ideas are freely about. And I think the ideas that are currently going around are that more of they're not of objection and rebellion, but more kind of like I mean depression and stuff. But like further than that, like kind of joy, peace, unity, like we're all kind of just there and we just vibe together. So it's
Yeah.
pretty sweet.
It's
So
very funny because I look at social media very differently, but I'm probably actually looking into it as a reflection of myself because I'm adding my own friends that are, a lot in my age group. So I see a lot of negativity. I see a lot of, just needless fighting. And that might just be me looking at my own generation. Whereas I do see, like, from younger generations, it's just like meme after meme after meme and like funny reel after funny reel, and I'm like, man, okay, maybe what you're saying is right. Like,
we
at first when I listen to this, I want to bristle a little bit. I'm like, hey, like I'm a millennial and we're tough and we're not power hungry and we're not. But man, what you just said made actually so much sense, and it helped because you actually moderated by saying we're kind of in that time where you might see weaker people, but we're not quite to like the weak state. So you're admitting like your own lot in life, kind of where you guys are, but you're not saying, we've gotten to the state where we're just like weak pushovers, but we're also not like you guys were when it was like maybe a harder time or whatever.
yeah. We've got we've got a Discord server with some like 200 people on it, all church members, and we just kind of joke around and like do random stuff. They have calls and people hop on and they play games and all that sort of stuff. And we just kind of chill together and talk and have fun. And it's a normal thing to just hop on. There's not a lot of disagreements or debates or, heated arguments. No one cares about politics. We're all like 16, 15, 18. So it's
That's hilarious.
yeah, it's pretty fun. We're not we're not as rebellious and, you know, as people think we are.
Yeah. When I was a bit younger, there was this page that came out called the Dive page on Facebook. Some people still loved it because they thought it was like iron sharpening iron, but man, I couldn't stand it because it was just like fighting and debating. And it was kind of like what you're talking about with your Discord server, where it's like hundreds of people in the church all getting on to talk about stuff. But the things we chose to talk about were the things that were like, what do you guys think about this confusing verse? If it's not this, you're stupid. And it just like, it devolved so quickly. Some people still found it fun, but I personally did not. Um, and so, man, I hate the things you're saying so much because of what they speak about my generation and older. But I think it's such a solid point, and I can't really refute it. So, maybe for us older people, which is so bizarre for me to say, maybe for us older people, we need to just make sure we're not judging the younger generation based on how we operate. I think is kind of what we're getting at to the bottom line, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Man,
I can't going back to what you said, I can't imagine that. We don't really I've never really experienced that. We don't really have that. It's all kind of silly discussions about like, anarchy and whatever. Like
yeah.
just philosophical things that are completely stupid and random, but so much fun to talk about and just joke about. And it's great.
Okay, so this is just a theory, and I'm going to try and make this very efficiently said, but I think the generation before me, the older people, they kind of went through a time of like church disruption and church splitting over doctrinal things. And when the dust settled and they found their feet again, they had to prove things for themselves. They had to kind of build up what they believed and what their worldview was. And so they were used to fighting. They were kind of like grizzled war veterans or something. And then they came back home, quote unquote, to my generation and were like, here's what battle's like. Here's what war is like. So we grew up with these like war stories and we're always like ready for the fight. That's why there was a huge boom in like apologetic stuff. I love it, like defense of the faith. But I think I love it so much because I'm like ready for the fight to happen again. But as you get younger and more removed from some of those like discordant times, you get less sense of like, I need to be fighting all the time. So maybe that's playing into some of what you're saying here.
Yeah. Back to what I said about the strong men make good times. We
Right.
like we've we've been built upon a strong foundation of like faith and good beliefs and a good structure. And I think we reap the benefits that you guys have fought for. I think now that it's come
So,
down to,
man,
I know we're moochers.
I was 2 years old when we had church splits. Okay. I guess with other splits, I was a little older, but
Yeah, yeah. I
no,
think,
that's fair though. And when we hopefully we have the mentality of like not, like those people fought for those ideals for a reason. You'd hate to you'd hate to have this. It's almost like people go off to war, right? And they're like, we're going to fight for our country, like we love our nation. And they go and fight and they come back and they hate everybody they see because they feel like, oh, you're just ungrateful for everything I've given to you. And it's like, you forget those are the people you fought for in the first place. So, maybe us older people do need to have kind of that mentality rather than being like, oh, you guys are just flippant or don't care about anything or rebellious when you're not really being rebellious. Maybe we just need to be realizing like just because we might have gone through difficult times doesn't mean you have, and just because you haven't doesn't mean you're worse somehow.
yeah, I think that's fair. I think we've definitely, we haven't gone through anything really major. Maybe some of the older teens have, like some of the splits or some of that stuff, but I've never experienced anything rough like that. And so I just kind of experience things in a different way than I presume the older generations would.
Yeah, a little bit more individualistic. Like in your own life, you've got your own things you deal with, obviously, but
Yeah.
maybe not like as a generational thing.
Yeah.
Or, even you do deal with some generational things. I mean, the world we live in right now is kind of nuts. And it's always been nuts, but like you deal with that a lot more than, when I grew up, it really didn't seem that bad.
Yeah. It's world right now is a bit cracked. Uh I
But even
think
that,
I
in your response to that, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, the world is nuts. And you're like, huh, yeah, it's crazy,
yeah,
man. And I'm like, no,
yeah.
like, how do you deal with it? I'm like on this intense offensive. And you're like, I don't know, man. We just walk through every day. You're just very chill.
I mean like it is kind of true. We just kind of walk through every day like, Trump got like attempted assassinated twice, right? Like, okay, sorry, mate. I sorry about your ear, but like, you know, I don't like I don't we don't really find a rough patch in that because we're not associated with politics or any of the dilemmas that have come before Cold War or any of the like 9/11 even. We haven't
Right.
experienced that. We haven't like gone through anything traumatic. And so America as a whole is kind of just, from what I see it, like just a dwelling place, right?
Yeah.
And maybe even the church too. We kind of see that as a dwelling place, like, here's where we are. Let's enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
Instead of, here's where we are. Let's fight for it. Like,
Right.
stand our ground because we already have the ground. So
Yeah. It's like someone that built a home. And when you build the home, you notice all the flaws in it because you built it from the ground up. You're like, ah, that's not exactly level. Whereas if you were just born and that's your home, you're like, this is where I'm from. I mean, I don't know. Like, you don't notice
yeah,
all the things, just what you're used
yeah.
to. Man, that's so good. You are, there was a reason I chose you. This is so good. Okay, question four. We got to move on. I want to be respectful of your time. But what do you perceive to be the biggest issue facing our church? And this could be, um, it could be anything. And I know that it's tough. I know you don't want to speak like too negatively or anything like that. But ideally, when we're looking at issues, it's not to try and tear down, but actually to try and be like, let's just notice our flaws and try and build them up a little bit. And I'm curious if you would inform your answer based on like what people talk about your age, you know?
I think the main thing that has been the biggest issue facing the church is minor disagreements. Like major disagreements, eventually things get settled out, but the minor disagreements slowly build up and they've definitely caused problems in the past. I think, like, as a generation, we haven't gone through a lot of stuff, but like there were discussions about hair dye and, nose rings and jewelry and stuff, which, it's over with now, right? I think that's all been settled out and everyone's fine with it. But in that moment, it was kind of like, oh boy, here we go again. The older generation is about to bash us to pieces.
Right.
Which, I mean, like, you know, it's all over with now, but those things do slowly build up where they're like, you know, things people see wrong and then they see more wrong and then more and more and more until it just becomes this big wedge stuck in between them and the church. And then, they leave to try to find somewhere better, but there's nowhere better. So they just kind of fall into this pit of why are we like, what are we doing here?
Hmm.
Which
Yeah.
kind of ranting, I'm sorry,
No,
but
no, no, you're
like
good. No, this is
I
all
think
good.
I think that the minor disagreements have definitely been a problem and probably will be in the future, which I think could be worked on just with more communication, collaboration, and interaction between kind of everybody in the church, younger, older. Maybe
Yeah.
not the toddlers. I don't think they have to deal with that yet, but the rest of us could maybe work on that.
Yeah. Yeah, because the minor disagreements are the ones that you kind of like agree to disagree and move on with, but it doesn't mean it's settled in your heart. You know, like this, you talked about like piercings and hair dye and stuff, specifically as it relates to like outside of church activities or like camps or stuff. Um, and it might be settled like we know where we stand and what we have to do now, or you guys might feel like that, but it doesn't mean everybody's okay with the conclusion or feels like a peace about it. They might just feel resigned. It's like, okay, it's done. But then when something else comes up, it's going to stack on top of that. Whereas if you totally squash it and you find actual peace between parties, then the next thing that comes along is just one thing, not one thing on top of a past thing. Yeah, that's something I never thought of because, I mean, so many people are focused on the bigger problems and they think, okay, if we can keep those down, which you should, I mean, you should get to the bottom of the bigger problems, but it makes you less likely to get to the bottom of the smaller problems. Or if you get to the bottom of them, at least like ideologically, like in your head, we might not always go that extra step and like make sure we're good with each other again, you know? Like
Yeah.
in personal relationships, I could walk away from a fight with you and be like, okay, that made me mad, but like I'm just gonna be done with it, you know? But if I don't actually have that moment where I come to you and I'm like, hey, are we good? Apologize for what I need to apologize for. Um, and just like actually make sure we're good, then that becomes bigger problems later.
Yeah. I think that also plays into pride. Uh, I think there needs to be more apologies that come from the heart and not from a big head. Like, I think people often get into arguments, come away thinking that they're right, and they're thinking, okay, the other person is going to have to apologize. I was not at fault. Like, why should I have to care about that? I
Hmm.
think, I definitely think that it could be it could be fixed if people just kind of suck it up and have some humility and like embrace things, apologize, and build things back up and start over, right? I think things could be settled quite a bit easier than how they're being solved now.
Do you think that there's anything that could be done to solve those littler problems before they become problems? Like, you're always going to have problems, right? But like, are there ways in which you guys would be more receptive to information that might be, like let's say at camp, they're like, yeah, we're not doing any jewelry at camp. And you guys are like, I hate that, like we wear jewelry. So, and maybe that doesn't affect you personally, but I know that's like kind of a big deal right now. Is there a way they could handle that information that you guys would like maybe feel better about so it doesn't even become a little problem?
I think so. We're going through American history right now. And have you ever heard the expression no taxation without representation?
Yes,
I
I've heard
think
that phrase.
I think that's pretty much the basis of what things could be solved with. Like if there was a discussion one on one or like, with a group and it's just kind of open like what should we do about this? I
Hmm.
think it could I think it could help a lot of those small issues and even the bigger ones. If you
Yeah.
just come and have a one on one or just have a discussion, come together as a group, set aside the differences and talk it out, things could definitely become into a better state.
Yeah. And even then, you might not reach the same conclusion. You know what I mean? Like, someone might go to the table with you and try and work out, like, okay, what can we do about this thing we perceive to be a problem? And you might sit there and think, I don't see it as a problem, so nothing. Like you might not reach a good conclusion, but what if it was like 50% of them you could reach like a good compromise or a good conclusion? Would that not be worth it? Or even if it was like 10%, doing like the Abraham thing where you
Yeah.
you walk it down, like if you could solve one more problem that way with not hurt feelings and um like an appropriate respect that's been maintained between parties, like would that not be worth it? And I think anybody would answer that it would.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's a good answer. All right, man, we got one more. You ready?
I think so.
Okay. So, man, typically that question four is like the negative one. It's the one people are like, I'm a little hesitant to say this because I don't want to step on toes. You just went for it, and your answer was so like straight down the middle. Like it was just so well done. It wasn't about one person or another. It was just this is the reality of the situation. I see this as a problem for all of us. And so nothing negative about that, but I do want to end on a positive note. What do you see as the best thing that our church has to offer that we need to encourage more of? Like what could we just, it's like we've got this, but man, if we just had more of that or did more of that, it would just be like the greatest place ever.
I think it's unity. I think that just the separation and the conflict out in the world, I think is what makes our church so strong and what we have just such a great blessing to have. We have those bonds, we have those strengths where we can just kind of be together and mm, like just talk and have relationships and have friendships, even like across countries, across states. Like if you go to the feast, you could just talk with people. Like you're all there, you all have roughly the same moral beliefs, and you can just make so many friends that no one else has the opportunity to have. You can just, like, the friends at school that I have, they pretty much only have people they know and like in one township or one city. It doesn't go much further than that. We have friends in Europe, we have friends in Jamaica and like Canada and Texas and all over there. Whatever's going on over there. And like no one else has that opportunity to just have those friendships, have those bonds that we are able to have. And I think that is really what makes the church, like, I mean, besides God and, the awesome knowledge that we have of that's what makes the church, like, that's the best thing we have to offer. I see it as kind of a trade-off. Like, you have the bonds in your own congregation, but also like you get to make friends outside of that congregation and kind of spread the love, because some people have, I know some people in Wisconsin with a congregation of like 15, and
Mhm.
they're the only teenagers there, and it's kind of boring. But if you the feast allows them to all come together, make some friends, have experiences that you're never ever going to have again, or maybe next year you will because that's how the feast works. But like it's just such a blessing to be able to have that. And also within your own congregation, you can you can do things that are just so unifying, and you can have friends that are bonds of a lifetime, which you don't really see in school or anywhere else. And I
Yeah.
think that's what the church has to offer, and that's like one of the biggest things that I see, besides God and faith and beliefs and morals and the way of life and all of that fun jazz.
Yeah, yeah. Pretty
So,
pretty important stuff, I'd say, but
yeah,
aside from that.
yeah. Aside
Yeah.
from that,
Yeah, and I think that that's maybe a point that we can relate on just a little bit because um, even though I'm in an older generation than you, and there are people older than me, you talked or we talked earlier about living in a place versus building a place where you guys are just kind of like living in the world that was built for you, and so you don't see all the flaws or anything, or maybe there's a danger of taking something for granted because you didn't build it, and that might be what older people see when they look at you guys. But to be honest, I was also born into a church that had that already. I had friends in my congregation. I went to the feast. I went to Winter Family Weekend. I went to camps. I got to meet a lot of people. And I loved that. And it was great. But it was the world that was already there. And so now that I'm older, I think I forget to take advantage of that as often as I should. Or I forget to encourage that, and sometimes I'm like, I don't really want to go like to 6 camps this year. That's exhausting. And it's like I forget that I was born into that and other people need it too. So I need to help facilitate that. And I think that could be a way that um, we relate because that was the home that I was built in, that's the home that I was born into as well. And so I might be in danger of taking that for granted just a little bit. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we've got for today. So, Dallin, I appreciate you being on. I think you absolutely blew this out of the water. I'm so excited for people to hear this because I know you're just thinking, well, I'm just a person that's answering questions and whatever. But I think people will listen to this and be like, man, what a brilliant person. I think you've represented your generation really well. I do really appreciate you being on. I think these are fantastic answers that everybody can learn from, and hopefully, it does facilitate better understanding across the demographics and better unity as you wish for. So, yeah, thanks for being on the show.
well, thank you for having me. Yeah, this has been great.
And thank you guys very much for listening in. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this interview and the other ones as part of this series, and hopefully, you'll tune in for the next ones to come. Thanks again.